container ships. This is really what I want to try and achieve. Now, this she was actually built in Denmark, and as you can see, now she is 15,000 TEUs, and there's a limit on the number of ports. You're having a big new port built in Wilhelmshaven, as some of you will be well aware. These ships can go there, but there you are. She's equivalent to, she 15,000 TEUs, as you can see. She is, yes, she can go through. She cannot go through the canal as yet, to my knowledge. No, she can't. No, she will be able to, obviously. She can probably go through once the canal expansion is undertaken. She certainly can't go through today. Now you can see the sheer scale of the ship. She is rather large. And look at the bulbous bow. It's quite impressive. It really is. And there's the bridge structure. Now, under the new ships, there are certain spaces. They're going to change the configuration of where the bridge is and the accommodation in the new ships. But this is fairly typical. We had some of them actually laid up in Scotland recently because of the slump in the global economy. But there's the size. That gives the size of the scale of the propeller. And you can see that she is capable of 31 knots. Now, you use an awful lot of fuel if you're steaming at 31 knots. Now, a lot of the shipping lines, because of the recession, have slowed the speed of the ships down. Now, there's a consequence in that, because the ships were never designed to be slowed down. So there's been all sorts of issues in the industry about how to make changes to the infrastructure to deal with the slow speed, or slow airspeed, because it means you need to put more ships on the rotations. There you are, that's her being loaded. It's pretty impressive stuff. Little vessel on the port side there. And there you can see the sheer scale, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 cranes to deal with it. That's quite impressive. Hamburg, if you get a chance to go around the container terminal in Hamburg, that I will be doing tomorrow, it's something worth doing. Very automated, Hamburg, and very impressive. Now you can see that she's 1,300 feet long, and she's got a net tonnage of 123,000 tons, and the engine is 14 cylinders producing 110,000 brake horsepower. Now that's a typical picture of her. You can see, I think it's an impressive structure without any shadow of doubt. Now the question is, in all these boxes, of course, there's a lot of things. I mean, a lot of products are carried in containers today that weren't in the past. Agricultural products are carried today in containers that weren't in the past. Now, can you imagine the amount of products that perhaps we don't really need in some of these boxes? I would pose the question. A lot of consumption that we don't actually need. And that's why I think we're going to see a massive change over the next 5 years in particular, with people, because of the global economic crisis, with people reappraising what they're going to buy. And we're probably going to see a trend to more regionalization. We already had an announcement last week of a factory being closed in India and moved back to Scotland, one of the big pharmaceutical companies. Now, I think that's a sign. Now, Germany's doing very well just now economically because of your export markets and your abilities and capabilities in engineering. But we may see a lot of the production, not a lot of it, but a portion of the production that's gone to the east coming back to Northern Europe. I definitely see that over the next 5 years. Now that's the engine. It's a pretty impressive engine. It really is. It's something else. And that's the engine built, of course, in the yard before it was disassembled and reassembled on the hull of the ship. So there you are. There's the camshaft. Pretty impressive. Some of us are very excited about these things called camshafts. My wife doesn't think it is one of the big cylinders. She's not so excited about these things as I am. And anyway, you can see the sheer scale of the operation. Now, funnily enough, the person that sent me that was the senior man in the commission at the time. And he said to me that he actually had an opinion that a lot of the big ships would come as far as really come through the Suez Canal. They might come to a couple of ports in the Med, but the big ships wouldn't come on into Northern Europe. Now, I'm chairing a conference in Bologna later this year, and the theme is all the maritime corridors that are actually routing through the Med, up through the Aegean, into the corridors, into Czechia, into Slovakia, into Hungary, probably into Ukraine. Now, a lot of these cargo flows could logically go up in through Koper in Slovenia, through Trieste in Italy, into that hinterland. But most of the time, these big ships come all the way around to Hamburg or to Antwerp or Bremerhaven, and the cargo, a lot of it is destined for Central and Eastern Europe, and of course it goes across land or inland waterways into Eastern Europe. Now, the shipping lines, that's the model the shipping lines generally employ. Now, are we going to see, and this is the question, a change over the next few years? Are we actually going to see the transit into parts of the Med and satisfy some of CEE without coming through the infrastructure of Northern Europe? It's a debating point, and we could debate that obviously on another occasion. Now, general cargo ships, still terribly important in the industry. They've got gear, that's a geared ship, as you can see. Rickmers is a very fine German company, and very much specialized in different special projects. And I have the authority of Rickmers to use this picture because of all the copyright issues with photographs. There's Ro-Ro, as we talked about. We will maybe, I think the important point I want to make about Ro-Ro, and I'll show you this in one slide, on the emission control areas. Have you been briefed on the sulfur issues and emission control areas? Have you been told about that? Right, well, the IMO, I happen to have a full profile of the IMO, International Maritime Organization, here. They've come up with a strategy that the sulfur content by 2015 is to be down in ships to 0.1%. And the European Commission, not to be outdone, came up with a similarly questionable strategy for ships in North European waters. Now, frankly, this nice political goal is desirable on paper, but more difficult to implement in practice. Because if a ship is coming up from South Africa, which many do with fruit, for example, and wines, and she's coming up to Hamburg, she, first of all, will not get low sulfur fuel in South Africa because they don't have any. So she will go to the Canaries and she'll have to bunker with low sulfur fuel in the Canaries to come up to Antwerp, Rotterdam, Hamburg. Now, these are the practical things I keep saying about the shop floor exposure. And in fact, some of the oils out of Africa don't have the same characteristics as some of the oils from other parts of the world. And there isn't actually so much sulfur in some of them as there is in others. So there's a very complex issue here. So under the Northern Maritime University project, with which I'm engaged here with Jacobs, we've got the Swedish Research Institute that have done some tremendous work on maritime emissions, really clever work on maritime emissions. And also I'm working with the Director General of the International Bunker Industry Association, which represents the bunker industry around the whole world. Now, they've got certain opinions because they represent the industry, as indeed does the Swedish Research Institute, who are very much an academic undertaking. Now, it's quite clear to me now that if we can get these two together to a common strategy of what is a realistic emissions control strategy, we've actually made a major success. And we will probably take our findings to the Commission and IMO in due course to make the case that whilst their objectives are very honourable and very desirable, to actually implement them would be more difficult. And of course, if you're having low sulfur fuel, it's more expensive than fuel with a higher sulfur content. So these are all the questions, are deep questions, which I think are so important that the universities engage in. And I'm very keen to see the universities much closer to the shipping industry, actually working together with your abilities and your lateral vision to come up with practical solutions for the future, because it's your generation that are going to be running the industry in the next 25 years. It's not going to be me. If we can give you some advice and some counsel from our experience, you've got to take up the strategy of the industry and take it to its next stage. And therefore, the more exposure you have to some of these issues, the better. And I've actually got a map which I'll show you on the ECA areas, which are very important. Now, this is a Rickmer's ship. This shows you, this is like the old cargo ship of the old days. You can see all the different characteristics of the cargo under deck and the large structures on deck, including boats. Now, that, of course, to load is very, very scientific. You better get your center of gravity right. You better make sure your ship stability is 100%, and I don't mean 99. If we had time today, I'd show you some amusing videos of things that haven't quite worked out according to plan, because some people got that a little bit wrong. But this is very much a very good example, and she can carry containers as well as you see just forward of the bridge structure. Now, this is, in fact, a Turkish yard, and this is a bulk carrier being built in a Turkish yard. It'd be interesting to do a session, actually, on new builds and various things associated with that. But actually, some of the work going on in Turkey is of a very high standard. Indeed, without any hesitation, that is definitely to be true. There's another Rickmer's special project cargo on a flat here. This is the kind of structures that you move. Then, of course, you have semi-submersible vessels that move capital structures around the world. I've got a couple of slides of that. This is, in fact, another of the Rickmer's vessels, which is, see the heavy cranes, the heavy lift cranes there. These I don't know the actual safe working load of that crane, but it will be several hundred tons. Now, you better get that lift right too, because if you make a mistake on that, the ship's going over. Make no mistake about that whatsoever. Just before the planning to load these ships is incredibly detailed and complex. And it really is, the knowledge of very high level of mass is a fundamental to that. There's a crane example, and this is the Kira railway cranes being loaded in Jakarta in Indonesia. And that was 167 tons there. And that's a good photograph, actually. And that's Samskip, which is one of the smaller companies that does feeder short sea movements in North European waters. They had to look at various project cargoes going from the Czech Republic to a new complex in Scotland. So they actually moved the cargo on flats to the port, and then from the port, of course, they would go by seaborne transport, probably in this case to Grangemouth. Now, that's the Samskip Endeavour. She is about 800 TEUs, and that is fairly common. Now, there was a phase where we were going through in the industry where the deep sea ships were doing 23, 24 knots in the Far East into North Europe, and the feeder ships were doing something like 13 or 14, and that rather defeats the object, because a lot of your big ships go into the Rotterdams, the Antwerps, Zeebrugge now for sure, Zeebrugge, and certainly, of course, to Hamburg. And I suppose one of the issues for Hamburg, when you think about it, you bring in MMRs to Hamburg carrying 50,000 TEU. Now, they won't all come off in Hamburg, obviously. But you look at the road infrastructure, even around Hamburg. You're taking this big ship up the Elbe, and you're going to, let's say, discharge, half of that, because obviously the cargo goes on and off at different stages, and you're putting that volume of cargo onto the roads and the rail infrastructure and the inland waterways around Hamburg. Now, is that sensible? The bigger the ships become, the bigger load on the land infrastructure. And that is a big issue. And that's what people have got to really think about. And I'm looking to your generation very much to do that thinking through. Because if you spend all the money on a major port, you want as many ships coming in as possible and as many containers coming through your port as possible. But if you don't get the land right, for example, we've got Felixstowe in the UK. Felixstowe and Southampton are the only ports that can take the big container ships. Now, in the UK, if you can envision a map of UK, in the greater southeast, which is Bristol across to London, we've got a population of 18 million.